Santanet, Julie Tumamait. No an Chumash Kathnuna Achai. Geri Wash, Lucy Tumamait, Coco Wash, Vincent Tumamait. Hello, my name is Julie Tumamait. I am Chumash, and my mother is Lucy Tumamait, and my father is Vincent Tumamait. I grew up in the Ojai Valley. I'm the youngest of 7. I have 3 brothers and 3 sisters. And we loved growing up there in that river bottom. And when we found out later on as growing up and learning our ancestry that our great-great-grandmother, Alula Mewe, was born just not far from where we grew up in the village of Matilha. So I still live in Ojai. I'm married to Bruce Stensley, and we have 3 children, 2 girls, Paula, Robin, and Erin. In 1811, my great-grandfather was born. He was born right in that middle period of mission period. He is full-blood Chumash, as well as his son, Cecilio. So our family comes from a very direct line of, we're descendants from full-blood Native peoples. So they were here in Ventura. We're at the Ventura Museum right now, a part which was at one point part of the mission grounds, the garden. And our family was very involved in that mission period. As people were being converted into Catholicism and their names being changed into Spanish names, my great-grandfather, Juan de Jesus Tumamait, he was given that name, Juan de Jesus, as his baptism name. Well, as time went on, he grew up, and as a young boy, I think pre-teenage, prepubescent, his parents died one right after another. So the people in Ventura, they named him Tumamait, which is said to have meant an orphan, one who learned to carry, let me see, we had to edit that. Tumamait meant an orphan, one who learned to carry things on his back, or was raised by his grandparents as well. So that name, today I hold that name. Our families, I use it, my husband, you're not changing your name, you're going to hyphenate, so our kids are hyphenated too, because Stansley means a slope of stones, it's Norwegian. So I use that name, and I take that meaning of carrying things on the back as a metaphor for the social and environmental justice that we are doing here today as my family. What my purpose is here is to take advantage of that name and use it with its full force, to be able to have a voice and to hopefully bring my family's power in from time before and tell them, just let me know what needs to be done. Don't let me walk with fear as our relatives did in those times. So I use it as a power, a strength, a name that will carry on into the future. We live in this place in such an amazing, vast territory. Our connection with the natural world was essential. There are people who are just plant people. There are people who work with the natural world, the supernatural world, that are prophets, that are, well, I shouldn't say prophets, that's really not the right word, but are visionaries. They go through dream time. They become a chuklash, a doctor. There's one of our most powerful plants that show up in our ethnographic storytelling as an old woman, a very powerful old woman. Well, that old woman is Nini Mamoy, grandmother Mamoy Datura. And that's the plant that was used for many things. One, to help a person attain an atashwin, and that's a dream helper, spirit guide. It was important in those times. What's important in our times today, we look at stones as a way of healing us, which they do. We look at a way of guardian angels that help us. So all those spirit helpers, they just change the names. So for us, the Atashwin, the Mamoy helped us in obtaining who our Atashwin would be or what it is, which could be a deceased relative, an oak tree, certain plants or animals. So that in that particular plant, there were certain things that if you saw in those times apparitions that were, or spells that were being cast on a person, you would take a drink of that plant prepared by a medicine person to help guard and protect you. There are certain other plants that they call like chuchupate, which is a very powerful plant. You keep it on you to ward off rattlesnake bites because they don't like the smell of it. the Yerba Santa. I can't remember its Chumash name, but it's a blood tonic. It's a blood purifier. It's immune system. The elderberry, kayash, that the blossoms were used not only for medicinal, very heavy, like bronchitis. You would drink the elderberry tea, but it also was an immune builder and built up your immune systems. There was our beautiful little flower, the huaxtecoloco, the rose, the wild rose, Rosa californica. That if people could just look at how beautiful this rose is, we wouldn't need. I love English roses, but it is so sustainable to this land, and that was another thing. The people had to have these relationships with these plants so that when they knew when they grew, that they would gather as much. They ate the rose hips because they were sweet, but very few sweet things. They ate the berries of the elderberry as well, but then they knew to take those petals from the rose, smush them up and dry them up and use them as powder and talcum for the baby and for themselves. They would use it and let the water soak up the oil of the rose petals and use it as an eye wash to soothe red burning eyes. The rose hips also became ornamentation. They were cute, little tiny red beads that kind of dried up and shriveled up but still maintained their red color, so for ornamentation. The chilecote plant, the wild cucumber, was burned and in the bowls just mushed up into a pigment that could either be used as a binder for black paint or a geometric topical healing ointment for kidneys, and it was helped to relieve women during pregnancy and delivery. So we had many plants like that. The walnuts, like right now we have the wild cherries. There's not a lot of meat on the cherries right now. They're very sweet, and we just grew up eating these things. My father always just had times a year where he introduced us to these type of things. Now we also had the pomegranates that came in and the persimmons, but yet we always knew to gather the walnuts and the cherries. The black walnuts aren't very big, but they're nice and the meat's real sweet in there. Some people use the husk and the outer part of the walnut for dye for basketry material. We did it occasionally, but the half walnuts, when you break them in half and if they fall in half, we turned them into a dice game, which is a similar game that was played up in our upper world, which determined our weather. That's a real long story. But at the end of the year, the score was added up, and the ante was rain. So we had these sun and eagle and morning star and snilly moon sky coyote played these game nightly, moon refereed. So again, paying attention, and in those times of looking at plants, watching what animals are doing. Are they gathering early? Are the acorns falling off the trees early? That's a sign of rain. Or it can be a sign of drought if people and animals are doing things that look like, oh, why are they doing that? What is the weatherman finding out about the gambling game up in the upper world? Well, it could be that sun and eagle won, so there's not going to be any rain. So our cave, our images, our sacred paintings in there give us those stories. It gave that particular weather doctor answers to our to be able to predict weather. So it was always about paying attention, gathering, but yet leaving stuff behind. When you pick gathered chia seed, for instance, which was a plant of the sage family, the salvia, that you carried it when you traveled with you all the time because it puffs up like 10 times its size. It has a gelatinous form that makes it stick to your body. Unless you ate too much, then you had to be careful. You could only eat so much of that, but it was high in protein and a lot of other nutritional value, so that when you traveled, it not only gave you a kind of quenched your thirst along with the lemonade berry, but it filled you up and it gave you energy. So whenever you traveled, because we walked everywhere, you needed chia seed. So every plant, every tree had multiple uses. I could spend hours just talking about the oak tree, which is one of my favorite plants. But they're all sacred. They're all, when people talk about the sage bundling, we didn't necessarily bundle the white sage the way people do today. It's kind of a modern, about the 70s, that started to become popular with the sweat lodges. We did burn a type of, it's not even a sage, it's Artemisia. Coastal sage, they call it, but it's not part of the salvia family. But when a person died, the Artemisia was dried and bundled and burned in the house if the person died in the house. But it was also used fresh because it's a very aromatic, minty smelling plant. So you put it in a container of spring water, and you dipped the bundle of in Spanish it's called romarillo, or huihue in our language. So you would take that and put it into the directions. People during the Hutash Festival, which is right where we are right now at the end of August, in celebrations would wash their faces with this water and as a cleansing. So that was a purification. That was the cleansing, as opposed to what people do today with the sage bundle and the feathers. So like I say, every single living being in our territory was honored, had a purpose, and was respected. So it was at this time of the year that people gathered just right here in Ventura off Thompson Boulevard, would have a 5-day event where animals were danced to or for. And when I do my educational programs with the kids, they often ask me the question about God, and do the Chumash believe in God? Well, yes, but the God wasn't this image that we see today. It was the God was in the animals, was in the deer, was in the eagle, was in the rabbit, was in the oak trees. It was all around them. So when they killed a deer, they would say their prayer, they would give an offering. When they picked a plant, they would leave an offering or leave some behind instead of taking all of everything. And that was their way of honoring and giving sanctity and sacredness to all the living beings around them to help them. I think one of the saddest parts of the mission period throughout it, even though the token offerings of letting people do some things within their culture, putting some designs in objects or painting images in the church that later on got painted over, so they're no longer there. But there were small little tokens of things that allowed the people to do some things. So the Hutash Festival, when talking about, they weren't allowed to do obviously their full moon ceremonies anymore, their new moon ceremonies, their spring equinoxes, or their solstice ceremonies. The solstice, summer solstice, we don't really know where that happened here in Ventura. It could have been the same place, Taylor Ranch, where winter solstice happened. We have a lot written about that particular spot. And we don't actually know where the Hutash Festival. So every year, every transition that the natural world did and went through, there was a time for celebration. So it was constant. So it wasn't like one place they would go to. They would move about. Sometimes they do ceremony, hot springs or cold springs. So the Hutash Festival happened in this time of, well, we just passed it in the end of August. But during the mission period, up until the 1930s, celebrations were allowed to happen, and they were 5 days, and one of them was called the Hutash Festival. So at this point, there was the High Mass of St. Michael, and then the native people came from all over to celebrate these. There were horse races down Thompson, there were bear fights. Someone from Tojon would bring a bear with them, and so it's very, very well documented. So in this also was songs for skunk, for bear, for eagle, for barracuda, and then there was one for the swordfish. Now it was times of drought again. We're like going into our 6th year of drought. And I can imagine the desperateness of people in our times, of our relatives here pre-mission, and when there was no rain. I mean, we're having bears come into our valleys now, and they're desperate. So the people would gather and come down from the backcountry, and they would settle into coastal regions where it's cooler, and they would pray. They would pray for somebody to help them. And unbeknownst to them, as the story goes, is that down below in the bottom of the ocean, there were these old men. Now, they were called the Elohayuns, and the Swordfish men. Well, they were old men, as the story, as Fernando Labrado Quetzalcoatl tells us, that the men were kind of hunched over with these long white beards and long white eyebrows that hung over their eyes like this. And they'd come out, they had their swordfish bill. They'd come out of the crystal house that they lived in at the bottom of the ocean, and they'd play games, just their normal thing. Well, every now and then they play catch with the whale. They'd toss whale, pahat, off the end of their swordfish, back and forth, and one would catch it, toss it over. Well, the synchronicity of those actions and the people praying on the beach to help save their lives, the whale would land right there, feeding everybody. And if you've seen a blue whale and it's skeletal, we know we've seen them, that every part of that whale was used, and all the food was shared with neighboring peoples, and it was such a wonderful gift that the people, again, as they honored the god in the swordfish, and they honored the whale by using all parts of it, they would sing to the Elohayun. And it said that the men, got some tickling me here, said that the men would dance in the regalia of the swordfish. And we have evidence of this from some of the burials that were found on, I believe it was Santa Rosa Island, where some of the headdress came down over the shoulders with beautiful scale-like abalone sewn onto the regalia. And the cap had a swordfish bill out of it. So the dancer whirled in one direction and whirled in the other direction. So it seemed like it was a fast song that they ran around dancing to each fireplace of where all the families joined in these ceremonies. And so this melody that came to my father, Vincent Tumamait, Clarence Sterling, and Michael Ward, put this song together. Ahile la sunu, ahile la sunu, wawala wakai, wawala wakai, wawala wakai, ahile la sunu, ahile la sunu, wawala wakai, wawala wakai, wawala wakai, ahile la sunu, ahile la sunu, wawala wakai, wawala wakai, wawala wakai. Oh. So there we are. So this time of the year, I want to sing that song and give honor to all those things that still sustain us today, and those stories that stay with us, that carry on into the future. I think one of the saddest parts about knowing that they were so limited to what they could do during mission time, that, you know, they were all taken away from these traditional ways. They were all taught to genuflect in unison, and everything was removed from them. So those that came out on the other side, that still held language, still held, even though they did the prayers in the Catholic tradition, we know, and I really feel in my heart, that they were still praying to the Elohayun and to Hus and to Huha and Snillymoon up in the upper sky. And they had to do what they had to do in order to maintain some sense of sanity and not totally give up on where they come from and who they were as people. So, I did a Hutash Festival. I didn't do the 5 days this was back in 2002. I was talking with an elder, and we were talking about doing something for women, a ceremony for women. And we were just kind of shooting the breeze. Nothing real serious, I thought, at the time. But creators listening, relatives are going, yeah, okay. So about, I don't know, a few months later or so, it was in 2003, somebody comes up to me at another gathering in Thousand Oaks and said, how's your Hutash Festival coming? I go, what? Yeah, I heard you're doing a Hutash. I go, oh, okay. So I don't like being challenged because that means I got to do it. So I started the venture. I started putting this together. Everybody had lost funding. I barely, with the skin of my teeth, made it. But what was really beautiful about it, though, is I had a lot of personal people that I knew that were giving me their own personal money. The city helped a little bit. San Ynez helped a little bit. And I didn't know yet at the time where was I going to hold this festival. So I'm driving in Ventura. I don't know why, but all of a sudden I had this like awareness. Where am I? What street am I on? And I was on Thompson. I go, what am I doing here? And I'm going, why am I on this road? I just kind of lost it. I mean, it was some vision there I'm going through. So I drive by the old landmark historic Hutash Festival, where the San Miguel Chapel, first chapel built before the mission, because it was closest to the village of Sichalop, which is out here on the beach. They were the first converts in here because that was an on-top village, a very powerful political, religious village. So they built the little chapel there. Now, the last time I had seen it, it was full of weeds and had a chain link fence. But as I'm driving by, it's all landscaped. There's a monument with the acknowledgement as a landmark. I slammed on my brakes, spun a U-turn, and pulled in. And I'm like, wow, okay, thank you. So this is, of course, bring the Hutash Festival back to where it was. So I started that venture. It became a very beautiful day. I had a little protest from a couple people because I brought the Mass of St. Michael's to it as well. It was only one day, and Monsignor O'Brien at the time, San Buenaventura Mission, had a very respectful attitude towards my father, Vincent, and all his family. They all went to school there at Holy Cross. They got very beautiful handwriting out of it. You know, it's the rulers on the top of the hands. But he was very respectful of my father and me as I did service and funerals for my families because they would request it. I'd do it at gravesite. He was always very courteous and respectful to know and wait for me to be ready with all my altar and everything that I needed to. So I asked him, I said, Monsignor, would you come do Mass? And he said yes. So as I made plans to do this Hutash Festival, I was asking people if they would join me. The gals from Nikia, no, it was JC Romero and her family that came out and danced for us. Elder Adelina came and did ceremony there with me. And then I had some demonstrations of people doing crafts and flint knapping and basketry. I also had crafts for children. It was free to the public, and they brought, the public had to bring a toy or a canned food that went to a Native American intertribal group, Candelaria, American Indian Council. But I also had protests. I'd asked this one Chumash gentleman to come do the deer dance because he said he could do it. But then he backed out and said, you know, there's people protesting this. I said, what do you mean they're protesting this? Well, they can't believe that you're having Mass there. I said, look, I'm not inventing this, I'm reinventing it. Okay, this is part of where my relatives and maybe some of yours felt no issue. They're going to do both, and so there's that collaboration between the two. I said, if people want to come and protest, fine, I'll put a booth in. They can have their little protest booth. But I'm telling you, if any of you harm anybody of my family or Monsignor O'Brien, I'll kick their ass. Okay, so just let them know that. But they're welcome to show up. So again, religion is very personal. People can believe whatever. I never try to pray people out of their Catholicism. If they want to invest and step into ours, more power. I always say, I love interfaith, I love intertribal. The more prayers, the better. If we're looking at religion from the point of view of not a fair-weathered friend, but what the real teachings are. We all have the same teachings. And that's be truthful, be kind, be good, move with love. So anyway, it turned out to be a really good day after all. Monsignor and I told him about the threat. So he goes, well, let me get back to you. And he says, no, they said for me to go ahead. So I was grateful that he came. And it was a beautiful day. No protesters showed up. And people I had to kick out because our culture is so, people are just craving it. They're craving to know about our world, our natural world. This setting here in the museum with its natural setting with the native plants, there's so much potential to get people and children back in nature. And for us that hold that type of education, we're not all meant to do the same things. We're all meant to do something different. We have our politicians, we have our basket weavers, we have our plant people, we have our singers, our dancers, our storytellers. We are all needed in every aspect, because when we don't do that, we open the door for people who will appropriate our culture and take it and make money and power and name for themselves when they have absolutely no ancestry whatsoever. We actually got kicked out and banned from a Father Sarah protest in Santa Barbara, in a public place, on a public ground, in a public venue. And my name was on this list, and AIM was aiming to keep us out of there. I wasn't going to go anywhere. But, I thought, well, that's pretty ironic. I guess because they didn't want me to go in there and say, by the way, these people on this panel are the descendants from the first colonizers. How ironic is that? Arguing against Father Sarah. We have to deal with a lot of things in our culture as Chumash people today. And so I always ask for the spirit of our relatives to come past and outside of that alienation, that a struggle that they had to go through, and they're powerful on the other side I'm always asking them to be behind me and walk with me as I move through this world. And you know, I do a lot of things, and a lot of people don't know what I do. Some people make up things that I do. They tell stories about me, and you know, their opinion of me is none of my business. So, you know, I just know what I need to do. I know my purpose here and what my world looks like for me, and I walk it one step at a time. Just end with, you know, again, as I mentioned, we all should find out where we belong in our culture. It's beautiful once you step in. Like I said, I pray people to step in, but I want them to step in a place where they're comfortable. And we're all interested about something. We all have hobbies. We all have a craft or a gift. So you can always correlate it with our culture. There's enough about our culture known that once you step in, and once you do step in, I always see it as a hallway with doors. And so, okay, I'm picking the plant door. But once you go into a plant, there's a story connected to it, and there's a song connected to it. Oh, wait, let me go see that. And so there's all these little pathways that will bring you back to center. And so whatever that is, sometimes our culture skips generations. So where you have this place where even people that today, I don't know anything about my culture. I'm confident and just happy to know that I am. But then you have your children. You have your children's children. If you don't want to learn for yourself, learn for them and bring them to places. I'm always of service, and people sometimes say, well, you don't teach us anything. Well, how am I supposed to know that? Let me know. People ask me all the time, and I have a lot of energy, I have a lot of time, and I will, if I can and when I can, I do many things. So just to know that there are people that are willing to help and be part of things, but they need to know. They need to be asked. So I think I'll leave with that message, because I am here. And I am stronger on the other side, but get me while I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was amazing.